You're listening to the Cinemental Podcast.
Shall we begin?
Welcome back to the Cinemental Podcast, where we discuss mental health themes from cinema, television, and popular culture. I'm Jeffrey Jones, and I'm a filmmaker and professor, and I'm joined, as always, by my brother, Dr. Joshua Jones, who, as well as being a man so exciting, his lightsaber color would be beige. Beiger. The beigest. Is a general and forensic psychiatrist.
Jeff,
What a little treat for me right there, Josh. You wrote that. You wrote that part.
Jeff, I like to think of my personal Jedi mantra as let's be as boring as possible so the clones forget about me.
There you go. There you go. You are the guy in the IMF who's like, choose not to accept.
Choose not to accept. Beak.
All right, good stuff. We want you to start your week off right with our podcast, so we drop a new episode every Monday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern. And we drop a additional episode every Thursday at 9 a.m. You can listen to us wherever you get your podcasts, or you can watch our hottest, spiciest clips. And now full episodes on YouTube. Josh, today we're talking about Star Wars. I'm honestly surprised.
Haven't heard of it, Jeff.
I'm honestly surprised it took us 49 episodes to talk about Star Wars, because there's some really great mental health stuff here, and it's obviously, you know, is it in your top 5 favorite movies of all time? The OG Star Wars?
The OG Star Wars? Absolutely, yeah. Although I would say Empire Strikes Back ranks above it.
Yeah, and I think that's totally fair, but I think that there's just some love for the OG original Episode 4 Star Wars. Okay,
look,
so
let's get this out of the way right up front. I was raised on Star Wars. Much of my own personal ethics and morals derive from lessons that I learned or gleaned from Star Wars.
Which I'm going to challenge today, by the way, and I'm excited about that.
That's great. It's what I remember playing earliest with Dad. I can remember
and last today.
I mean, I've got Darth Vader right there behind me. Star Wars has been a very important force in my life.
There you go.
And
it's funny, you've got Darth Vader and I've got the Voldemort wand. So we both just clearly love the evil villains of various franchises. Josh, for those who haven't seen Star Wars, today we're talking about it. Which you haven't seen it, is a movie about an indoctrinated farm boy who joins a group of terrorists who carry out a 9/11-esque attack on the completely legally legitimate empire using a non-Christian power called the Force. This movie is obviously woke propaganda and should be banned from all libraries, but it is what we are going to be talking about today. Come on, that's a great recap.
I actually can't poke a lot of holes in it. That is definitely one way. That is definitely one way to look at it. I would argue that it's not necessarily. It doesn't have a ton of inclusion. I mean, there's definitely so many holes we can poke in Star Wars. There's been so much written about it. There's been so much extra content created about Star Wars. There's so many different rabbit holes we can go down, and we're not going to be able to cover them all today.
No, nor do I want to. You said it best. Everything has been talked about with Star Wars, except for, I think, what we're going to talk about. Josh, tell us what the topics are of today.
Something near and dear to our hearts: family dynamics.
Love it. Love it.
Yeah, and we're also going to talk about generational trauma.
Yeah. This is going to be a deep dive into generational trauma.
It is, and I think that this is a really good family. The Skywalker family is a good family to illustrate this.
Yeah.
And then we're going to talk about light side versus the dark side, balance in the Force, balance in oneself.
Yeah. Great. Okay, I'm gonna skip the recap, Josh. I really do feel like everybody has watched Star Wars, and I want to just dive in. Yeah. Before we do, though, we have another a sponsor this week, which I'm very excited about. Josh, do you know what the oldest brewery in America is?
It is the Yuengling Brewery.
Yeah, that's right. Yuengling in Pennsylvania. Well, Yuengling is hosting a special nationwide challenge where if you can finish a certain number of beers in an hour, Yuengling will pay for them. Not going to lie to you, this seems a little irresponsible to me.
It does.
But I don't control who our sponsors are. I just say yes to the money. So if you want to partake in the Yuengling Challenge, just go to your local watering hole and order 66. Then kill all the Yuenglings, and they will send you an official certificate as well as reimburse you. If you want to learn more, go to www.killtheyuenglings.com for more details.
That's a deep cut, Jeff. That's a really, really good one. Yeah.
Not for Star Wars nerds. That's a shallow cut for Star Wars nerds. All right. So today, Josh, as you said, we're talking about family trauma. Starting with obviously, the Skywalker family, starting with Anakin Skywalker.
Yeah.
Anakin was born into a violent world and had no father. He was then adopted, in a sense, by Qui-Gon, only to see him murdered and then passed off to Obi-Wan. The Jedi Council wanted nothing to do with him and even gave him a bullshit honorary title until I think a real father figure emerged, Emperor Palpatine. Now, in our pre-discussion, you were talking about how the generational trauma starts with Anakin. So let's break that down. Let's go through that.
By the way, before we get into the really serious part of this, I do want to say one thing about his mom, Shmi Skywalker, who claimed to Qui-Gon that the boy had no father, that she just suddenly, randomly appeared. Okay, Shmi, we got you. We see you. No father.
Why would she lie about that? It's not like Qui-Gon was going to be like, okay, whore, like sleeping around without a husband. No one was going to judge her for that.
You don't know that. You don't know the socio.
You also don't know that she was wrong, Josh. You also don't know that she was lying, and we should not be slut shaming Shmi.
Actually, I do know that, Jeff, because they blame it. They state that the midichlorians created him, and as we all know, there's no such goddamn thing as midichlorians.
Well, that's fair. That was one of the stupider things in Star Wars. But okay,
all right. So, generational trauma. Let's talk about Anakin Skywalker. Say what you want about the Jedi that became Darth Vader, but the poor dude was traumatized.
Oh yeah.
I mean, he was born into slavery. He experienced the profound attachment trauma of being separated from his mom,
right,
at a young age to join the Jedi Order, which, by the way, happened very fast, right?
Yeah.
This long-haired Jedi in rags shows up. He wins a pod race, and he's like, "Yeah, fly off in this silver starship with this guy." This all makes total sense. So that happened. That abandonment was coupled with the constant fear, nightmares that he would have about his mom's safety, which tragically did come to pass, which created a deep wound of fear of loss.
Right.
And that's really what drives Anakin, and I think to large extent Darth Vader, throughout the rest of the series. That level of regimentation and the way that they paired him with a master inadvertently exacerbated this fear of loss by discouraging attachment and emotional expression.
Well, and let's even go back a step. They weren't, they marched him in front of the whole council and denied him. I mean, he was told, hey, leave your mother for this, and then we don't think you're worthy. And Qui-Gon's going to take you on, regardless of the fact that the rest of us don't think you belong. And hold that ideal throughout his entire life.
Yeah.
Giving him that bullshit title later on.
Exceptionally good point. So Anakin, who already struggled with intense emotions, this created an internal conflict, a sense of being misunderstood, a sense of push me, pull you, rejection, acceptance.
Right.
And then when he met, when he reconnected with Padme and fell in love with her, his fear of losing her, projected from his earlier loss of his mom, became an overwhelming anxiety that pervades the most of the second and the entire third episode.
Right.
Palpatine then expertly exploits this.
Right.
So then Anakin's turn to the dark side was, in a twisted way, an attempt to gain control and prevent further loss, leading to the repetition compulsion of his own painful experiences through his actions as Darth Vader, with all the killing and the murdering and things like that.
That's all living within Anakin and Darth. How does that then get translated down to future generations? And before you talk about that, tell me the definition of generational trauma.
Generational trauma are traumatic events and memories and even some genetic factors, and we'll talk about in a second, that are passed down from parents to offspring or from one generation to the next.
Okay.
So you're being raised by a parent who was traumatized.
Right.
Their ways of adapting to that trauma, both healthy and unhealthy ways, are going to flavor the way they raise you.
Okay, that's great. Can you give me an example of that?
So you've got, and I actually see this all the time in very, very real life settings. You've got a mother who is now a single mother, and they're a single mother because they were a victim of domestic violence.
Okay.
And they've got a son or a daughter or multiple children. And they are subtly, or sometimes not so subtly, indicating to their kids that relationships are dangerous or men are dangerous.
Right.
And how do they do that? By they'll be walking along on the street and a man will approach them and they'll just instinctively seize up, hold the kid's hand tighter, pull them away to the other side.
Right.
All those things, momentary reactions.
And that's going to
build up over
absolutely
time.
flavor the kid's experience with men in the future.
Exactly.
That totally makes sense. Okay.
So that's
Okay.
one way. That's
Okay.
one way.
Okay.
And this, but did you know that it also, interestingly enough, can be passed in kind of a genetic fashion?
Anytime you say "did you know" and your "no" raises up an octave, odds are I don't, because I'm about to learn something deep in Josh's brain.
Not deep in my brain. This is very real science, Jeff. So there's a whole study in genetics called epigenetics. And as everybody knows, I think genes are the chromosomes, the DNA that parents pass to their children.
Okay.
Kids get half their DNA from their mother and half their DNA from their father.
And like 70% from midichlorians.
Fucking midichlorians. I will say, though, that a very good friend of mine in medical school, Dr. David Hodgkin, an excellent internal medicine physician, absolutely cracked me up one time when he ordered a CBC, a chem panel, and a midichlorian count
That's fantastic.
on a patient.
That's great.
Just cracked me up.
That patient later died. They had to scrub that from the data.
Well, they died, but their force ghost follows us around wherever we go. So your genes don't change, right, once you've got them. But what's really interesting is that there's all these molecules, proteins, tiny little chemicals that attach to parts of our DNA all the time.
Okay.
And control or influence how those genes are expressed.
Interesting.
So stress is a huge component of how genes are expressed. Mm-hmm. So if you are in an incredibly stressful environment, your genes may not function as well. Others might turn on more to help deal with that stress. So you really have a synergistic reaction. You inherit these genes from your parents, and then their raising of you helps control how some of those genes are turned on. And that's how generational trauma is actually passed.
Fascinating.
In a couple of different ways. Some obviously psychological and some much more biochemical.
How do we know this?
Through the meticulous work of what we call bench scientists. So folks that are stuck in labs, they get an idea, they develop a hypothesis, and they use a scientific method of meticulously looking at under electron microscopes, with different chemical reactions of how genes, how DNA, and how different chemicals affect that DNA, and then in many cases extrapolate it to what they see in human behavior.
So, okay, Josh, I've got the follow-up to The Big Bang Theory. You and I are going to write it. Bench Scientists, and it's a workplace comedy about those guys, because that sounds like the most boring thing ever, but I'm also so glad we have those guys. Bench Scientists is just the name itself sells. So let's work on a show called Bench Scientists. Thank God no one's watching this podcast yet, so no one can steal that idea.
Right. I love it. And I want to have one guy who is just a total meathead, jacked up guy. He's
yes.
Like, dude, I'm totally benching right now.
But he's also super smart. But he's also
super smart,
like,
yeah.
What do you bench, bro? What do you bench?
What do you bench? Dude, do you even bench, bro?
I love it. We're going to do
All
that.
All right.
So
that's generational trauma, Jeff.
So to dumb it down for people really, really big nerds have figured this out.
Even bigger nerds than me.
Would you make the argument that because Luke doesn't know who his father is, the generational trauma for Luke is passed down biologically? Or is Luke facing his own sort of beginning trauma that his kids are going to have to face because he was, raised as a orphan, on a farm and experienced the loss of his parental figures? His trauma is very similar to Darth's, but it's not the exact same. There are differences, but is he going through Darth's generational trauma, or is he just dealing with the trauma of his own life?
He's experiencing obviously both, but there is a generational trauma that is being passed down from Anakin Skywalker to Luke. And here's how. So that epigenetics phenomenon that I was talking about, where your expression of your DNA is influenced by stress, that starts before you're born. So all the stress that Padme is experiencing because, Anakin's turning to the dark side and she's, having her heart broken and having to fly to the volcano planet and stuff like that.
George Lucas gets a lot of shit, Josh, for how terrible his dialogue is. "You're breaking my heart" is not a terrible line. She just didn't deliver that line very well. Yes, the script was terrible, but you could deliver that line well. You could put that line in a well-written movie, and it would still, the line itself wasn't terrible.
I would actually have to say that I think that line was one of the most impressively directed lines in all of cinema.
Why would you say that?
To be able to get Natalie Portman to deliver it so poorly was real. I didn't say it was good direction. It was really impressive direction.
Sure.
Okay, Natalie, I want you to pretend that you're delivering this to a wet bowl of plain macaroni. I mean, seriously.
Oh, that's great. Poor Natalie.
So my point is that he inherited half of his genes from Anakin Skywalker.
Right.
He's also having the stress.
He being Luke. Right.
He being Luke and Leia.
Yeah.
They are both having all that stress in her womb being transmitted to them.
Right.
And then after he's born, interestingly enough for Luke, he does walk much the same path as Anakin. So he's got half of Anakin's genes, which obviously Anakin's expression of those genes was influenced by all that trauma.
Right.
Luke's got half of that as well. So some of him is likely to respond much the same way.
What is the specific generational trauma that is coursing through the Skywalker lineage, starting with Anakin?
It's loss, Jeff.
Okay.
It's the trauma of loss, and Anakin experiences it first.
Right.
Luke
and
also
is completely
destroyed by it.
Destroyed, but also manipulated by it.
Yes. Yeah.
Destroyed and manipulated by loss.
Luke and Leia both also have losses throughout their lives.
Right.
Luke's adopted, so the loss of the biologic parents.
But what does it lead Luke to do where you see, that's the generational trauma of loss?
Even though you have some of the same genes, half the same genes, and you experience much the same stuff, that doesn't doom you to repeat it. That doesn't doom you to be the same person as your father. Right. And that's one of the great things about therapy, about choice, about things like that. Generational trauma is passed down.
Right.
But it doesn't mean that everyone's affected by it the same way.
Well, sure, Luke was a whiny little bitch and Princess Leia was a badass.
All Luke wanted to do was go to Tashi Station and pick up some power converters. I do not know what your problem is with that, Jeff.
I wonder if he ever got those power converters. Because that might be the ultimate MacGuffin if he, at the end of his life, finally gets those power converters. And it's just like, yeah.
Well, I don't think he milked...
The Hobbit returning to the Shire.
I don't think he milked the power converters out of the things on that island.
Okay, and that also gets passed down to Rey, correct?
Not to Rey. Rey's not part of that lineage.
Oh, that's right. She was just Palpatine's kid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or
Okay.
grandkid or something like that.
Yeah. But it does get passed down to Kylo.
it does get passed down to Kylo Ren. Now, this is when we have to talk a little bit more about Leia before we get into Luke. So her generational trauma was probably blunted a little more than Luke's because she was
raised in a far better progressive society.
Yeah, more supportive society, things like that. I mean, now,
raised to be a leader from moment one.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, she did experience profound loss when, I don't know, her entire planet and her parents was wiped off by the Death Star.
that is woke rebel propaganda.
Okay.
It is not a Star Destroyer. It is a Star Enhancer.
then she finds out later that, it was actually my father who was behind that. My biological father wiped out my parents. So she had a lot of stuff too.
Yeah.
But Kylo Ren, or Ben Solo, is at the end of what we see of the Skywalker family's generational trauma.
Right.
He's raised with the knowledge of his grandfather's dark past and immense pressure of his parents' legacy. I mean, imagine being the child of Han and Leia.
Sure.
So he feels an intense pull both towards the light side and the dark side. He struggles with his identity formation in the shadow of such powerful figures, and then he becomes even an apprentice of Luke. So even more pressure, right?
Right.
So Leia and Han, despite their love for each other and for him, carried their own unresolved traumas.
Right.
And inadvertently...
And Luke.
And
Luke. Because Luke's the one that really does turn him at the end.
And they inadvertently transmitted that anxiety and emotional unavailability to Ben.
Right.
Leia's focus was the resistance. Han's focus was not getting too close to anything, even his wife and his child.
Right.
So what does that end up with for Ben Solo? It ends up with a tremendous amount of emotional dysregulation.
Ben being Kylo Ren, right?
Kylo Ren.
Yeah, let's just call him
Ben
Kylo
Solo.
Ren. I'm getting lost with that. I could give a shit that his name was Ben Solo. He's Kylo Ren.
Would you like to draw a diagram for yourself, Jeff, so you can keep up?
Okay.
So Kylo Ren has emotional dysregulation. To try to counter that, he jumps into kind of the side of the two sides that can't disappoint him because that person's gone. And that's identification with the aggressor, identification with Darth Vader.
Yeah, but let's also not forget that, like, I think one of the reasons that turned him to the dark side was Luke tries to kill him in the middle of the night.
Well, I mean that...
He's just there training.
Jeff, things happen.
I mean, if you wonder why Michael Jordan was so good, it's that Dean Smith came to, the UNC practice one day and tried to kill him in the middle of the night. And then he was like, I must become the greatest in the world. Like, yeah, that's a pretty traumatic thing that happens to a kid. And that would push me away. Hey, the light side tried to kill me in the middle of the night. Dark side hasn't done that.
Like I said, stuff happens, Jeff. What do you want from me?
That's all fascinating, Josh. And it's so fun because obviously so much of Star Wars is the repetition. It's the cyclical nature of the stories, and people who whined about episode 7 was basically just episode 4. That's always been what Star Wars is about. It's about the balance, it's about the repetition, it's about the cycles. And so it is interesting that, like, you're right, like Luke does go through basically the exact same trauma that Darth went through, and we see the reasons why Luke's life ended up that way. We don't see the reasons why Anakin's life ended up that way. We don't see the precursor to it the way that we do, with Luke. So his life makes a lot more sense to us, but it's still traumatic. And so the trauma of Darth is being passed, both biologically but also experientially, in Luke experiencing, much the same things and reacting the same way.
One thing, some of our viewers and listeners would point out and say, well, yeah, but that's a fictional story. Is that how it happens in real life? And the answer is yes. This is the kind of pattern I see in patients all the time, and that has been described when you talk about generational trauma. This was a very subtly well done portrayal of generational trauma with the background of a space opera.
That's a really interesting point, Josh, and it's something I want to briefly touch on, because this is one of those weird things about writing, is that writers will often stumble on a universal theme rather than intend on a universal theme, and I think it's really fascinating. Some people called me out in the MacGuffin episode that we just did about how the Ark was not explicitly ever said that it was related to nuclear war. I don't doubt that that's true, actually. I don't know that Lawrence Kasdan has ever come out. I think he wrote Indy, right? He wrote the first Indy, Lawrence Kasdan.
You got me on that one.
I think it was Lawrence Kasdan. Anyway, he never came out and said that. I'm drawing that conclusion from the fact that there was an immense thing happening in the world at the time, and this was a direct comparison to what was going on at the time. Writers absolutely stumble on universal themes. And a really fun exercise that I do at the beginning of my class every semester is I have students come up and tell me their best story, the one that they tell at parties to like get people to like them. And then I write the 10 elements of a story on the background. And as they're telling their story, I just walk through how everyone inherently knows how to tell a story because there are universal themes in writing. And so I don't know if George Lucas intended on writing something about generational trauma, but I bet he knew something about it because he sure did write it well. But if you're wondering if it's always the intention of writers to like nail something as hard as they nailed this, it's not. Sometimes we absolutely back into it because we're writing our own experiences. And because we know those experiences so well, and it happens to line up with good storytelling.
The story I tell at parties to get people to like me is about how I destroyed the Death Star with just an X-Wing.
I'm just glad you spent all that time in your youth, Josh, bullseyeing wombats or whatever it was.
You mean bullseyeing womp rats?
Whatever. Wombats. No, Jeff, there weren't wombats. Look, I'm not as big of a Star Wars fan, I think, as you are. If I'd made that mistake in Star Trek, then I would flog myself.
Oh, Star Trek's adorable.
Oh, you're funny.
All right.
I know the answer is going to be therapy. How do we break generational trauma?
Well,
and how do you know if you have it?
Well, if you are part of some classes, some racial minorities, chances are pretty high that you have generational trauma. Because of the way that your ancestors have likely been historically treated, and that's really tough. So, but it can happen for other individual reasons as well. I guess one of the ways, talk to your parents, talk to your grandparents, learn more about yourself. And then how do you break the cycle of the generational trauma? Is you talk about it, you get it out in the open, and you look at the behaviors that you want to change, and you try to change them. Therapy is one way to do that, but there are other ways as well.
Yeah. It's pretty obvious that this whole, us having a podcast is just, you shilling for therapy, trying to get people to go see a therapist for your own ends.
I'm just in the pocket of big therapy.
I think any time we talk about something on the podcast and you're listening, give it some thought as to whether it's affecting you. Like I know you're here probably just for the entertainment value because God damn we're entertaining. But you just give it a one through. You might be suffering from something that you don't know, that you don't understand. I was probably bipolar for the first 44 years of my life. And then once I got diagnosed, I was like, oh, hey, that's pretty obvious. You don't know what you don't know, and the only way is to try it out. But I think that I would argue, and tell me if I'm wrong here, most people are probably the experiencer, I don't want to say victim, of some sort of generational trauma, or have had a trauma that you might be passing to the next generation. And I do think it's your responsibility as a parent to know what those traumas are and to try not to pass them to your kid.
Yeah, it's a very high percentage of people who experienced what most folks would consider trauma, and the fact the odds that that's been passed down to you in some way pretty high. Right. Just get it out in the open, talk about it, and be open to the idea that it has affected your life in some way. Not to blame the choices that you're making as an adult on that, but to inform them.
Right. Okay, Josh, we've had a lot of fun talking about generational trauma in Star Wars. I want to ask you a heavy question.
Okay, Jeff.
I am very much pro reparations. I think that debt can be carried. I think that we owe a massive debt to the ancestors of slaves. I think that if we can transfer ownership, then we can transfer debt. Do you believe that Black people today, who are the ancestors of slaves, are still feeling the effects the biological effects of generational trauma?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Do you want to explain?
Yes, I do.
It can go that far.
Yeah, absolutely. Much of the society that we have built, we're not in a post racism society, and I know
100%.
That's oddly become controversial to say, but it's clearly true. Just for that reason, there continues to be generational trauma passed down. I have a very good friend who's got 2 African-American young men, and she's trying to struggle with how do you have the talk about how you have to behave as you start to become, black men in America, to be safe. As long as you're still having to have those kind of conversations that we have not had to have,
right?
Then there's generational trauma.
You and I bet, had a conversation of how do you manipulate the police to get out of a ticket.
I can't confirm or deny that.
I have absolutely had that conversation, and black kids are taught how to survive a ticket, and white kids are taught how to get out of a ticket.
Yeah.
And I just think that alone is like, I don't know how you can deny racism when those sorts of things are happening. But people are making a living at denying it. I mean, I agree with you. I'm not a doctor. Do you think that most psychiatrists would agree with you on that?
I don't know the answer to that one, Jeff. I would say a lot of the ones that I have encountered would, but I don't know, man. It is such a fraught political time right now.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know what people truly think, and I don't know what they truly believe in their hearts right now.
Yeah, that's fair.
And we're going to talk more about that as we go on, and we're going to talk more about that concept on Thursday.
We're going to talk about that on Thursday. Okay, so Josh, I just want to touch on light versus dark real quick. When we're kids, and when Star Wars sort of came out, and when we're young, we were taught there's a good side and a bad side.
Right.
There's a light side and a dark side, and it's kind of all or one in the Star Wars universe. And the more that I think about Star Wars, the more that concept really bothers me, because I just don't think that you have to live on one or the other. And the message of the movie is all about balance. So how do you have balance without engaging in some of the light side and some of the dark side?
Jeff, the Jedi were a victim of buying their own bullshit.
I agree.
Too much.
I
agree. The
agree.
fact that they're just like, no, we repress all the feelings and we only do the light and blah, blah, blah. And then they ended up doing some horrible, heinous things.
Right.
Quite honestly. So that they were a victim of their own bullshit.
Yeah.
There's not just two sides. There's not black and white. And in fact, black and white thinking, too much black and white thinking, can be very pathological psychologically.
Right.
There's so many shades of gray. And I think one of the lessons I've learned as I've aged, and have I aged, is that the gray is so much more prominent, so much more common,
Right.
than an obvious black or white answer.
Yeah, and it feels like the Jedi way was, oh, you feel angry? Don't.
Right,
When that's not healthy. That's not healthy. The healthy is like, okay, let's talk about why you're feeling angry. Let's talk about where that emotion comes from. We need to embrace that emotion. We need to really look at that emotion, in order to get past it. And in order to do that, you have to feel it. You have to go through it. And so I think that you have to go through the dark side in order to be, the perfect. And obviously that didn't happen in any character. It was once the dark side got a hold of you, then it was game over. But yeah, the light side, dark side has always troubled me. I also just want to briefly mention how Yoda is the dumbest reader of prophecies in the history of prophecies. The prophecy was Anakin is going to bring balance to the Force. There were 100 Jedis, or maybe 1,000 Jedis.
Correct.
2 Sith.
Right.
What do you think balance is, Yoda?
Right. You guys are going to lose. I mean,
That's right. And what did Anakin do? Killed all but 2 Jedi. He brought balance to the Force.
Yeah, balance.
That is what balance looks like.
Yeah, right.
Oh, read the prophecy wrong. I did. No shit.
Well, it's because he reads everything inside out, Jeff. I mean, the prophecy.
That's a good point.
The prophecy clearly said Anakin Skywalker is a Sith, and he read it as, is Anakin Skywalker a Sith?
There you go. All right, cool.
Jeff, you got some other thoughts about Star Wars?
Yeah, I do.
Some quick hitters.
So Andor has given me a new perspective on like who were actually the heroes behind the blowing up of the Death Star.
Sure.
And it really does make you think that like for all the work to give them the plans, it's really kind of crappy that at the end of the first movie they give medals to Han and Luke, you know, and to not anybody who was involved in Andor. But I remember when I first watched Star Wars, how absolutely ridiculous it was that I thought Chewbacca got so screwed. They make him walk up there with Han and Luke, and then they don't give him a medal. And it's like, why'd you make the guy walk up there if you're not even going to give him a medal? Like, they didn't even give him a participation trophy. And I don't speak Wookiee, but I can guarantee you that means, where's my medal? It means, where's my medal?
Yeah, you and I have always been upset about that scene. In fact, we get giddy when that scene comes on because we know we get to yell,
I got screwed. Okay, Josh, I think that's all well done. There's so much stuff to talk about when it comes to Star Wars, but this was our opportunity to talk about generational trauma. I think we did a pretty good job. Okay, so Josh, we talked earlier about Padme and how terrible the line was of, Annie, you broke my heart. Usually when we do, if we're going to do a top 5 list about screenwriting, it's going to be me since I'm the screenwriting expert, but I do think that you are much more of a Star Wars fan than I am. And so today you're doing the top 5 list, and it's the top 5 worst lines of dialogue in all of Star Wars. As always, no one asked for this list, so this is our top 5 list that no one asked for. Josh, kick us off with your worst lines of dialogue from Star Wars.
Well, Jeff, an honorable mention that I just love is in Episode 3 when the Emperor is finally exposed, and he just goes, for no apparent reason, no. I was like, what are you doing? Why are you doing that?
No.
It was just, no. I was like, what? Why?
Yeah.
So that's my honorable mention.
Honorable mention, okay.
Count
if
me
you say
down.
unlimited power, by the way, I'm going to be really disappointed. Give me number 5.
Okay, Jeff, this comes from Anakin Skywalker in Attack of the Clones. I don't like sand. It's coarse and rough and irritating, and it gets everywhere. I believe I nailed the delivery.
You did nail the delivery. That is pretty weak. That's pretty weak sauce. Okay, give me number 4.
Jeff, this also comes from Anakin Skywalker.
Sure it does.
From The Phantom Menace. And this is when poor young Skywalker, played by Jake Lloyd, says, "Are you an angel?" to Padme. Oh my God.
He was such a cute kid, and
Cringe-worthy.
it was not a great actor, but he was such a cute kid. I don't fault him for anything. There's been a lot of people who have hated on him over the years, and just go fuck yourselves. Like, that was a child.
Right.
I'm sorry he couldn't be the perfect Darth Vader, but he's just a kid, and he did the best he could. Okay, number 3.
Exactly right.
Thank you for highlighting how terrible it was, Josh.
No, number 3, Jeff. This comes from The Rise of Skywalker, the 9th movie, and it's uttered by Poe Dameron. And you will have to admit, this might be the laziest bit of screenwriting ever, when he simply says, "Somehow Palpatine returned."
Oh yeah, that was terrible. And I actually have so much respect for that actor. I think he knew going in that was dumb. He probably read that. He was like, "Ugh, I'm getting paid a lot of money. I'm getting paid
Unfolds
a lot
his
of money."
check, unfolds his check, counts the zeros.
Yeah.
Somehow Palpatine returned. Can you give me that one again, Mr. Isaacs? Nope.
Okay, number 2, Josh.
All right, number 2, Jeff, comes from an underrated character. This is from The Last Jedi. This is from Rose Tico, and she says something inanely sentimental, such as, "That's how we're going to win. Not fighting what we hate, saving what we love."
Right. That's pretty, yeah.
All right, fine.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. And what is your worst line of dialogue in Star Wars history, Josh?
I think so. I think everybody will agree that is the horrendous exchange between Anakin Skywalker and Padme in Attack of the Clones with, "You're so beautiful. It's only because I'm so in love. No, it's because I'm so in love with you. So love has blinded you?"
Yeah, that's a good one. That's a good one for number 1. I'm honestly surprised no Jar Jar.
I mean, why pile on?
Yeah, and it's also one of those things where it's like all of Jar Jar was a mistake, you know. So why highlight necessarily what we all agree. It was just like, ooh, let's just put that one back in the box.
You know what's actually really funny is that in the Lego Star Wars universe, which they've made some really, really funny animated shows, they do an alternate history of Star Wars in which Jar Jar is a Sith, and it is hilarious.
That's great. I love that. Okay, Josh, that was the top 5 list that nobody asked for. I thought it was a pretty great list, not going to lie to you. So I did ask for it. But top 5 list no one asked for except for Jeff is too long of a title. So we're going to leave it at what it is. So our next episode is our 50th episode, and Josh and I are going to do a little bit of a State of the Union about our podcast, about where it's headed, et cetera, et cetera. We will probably talk a little bit more about Star Wars since we're talking about this week as well. But tune in because we're gonna talk about some interesting stuff. And I think we might take not a different direction. We're always going to talk about mental health in cinema, but we're gonna really lean into some of the things that are going on in the world because we just think that not being a part of that conversation is a big mistake. So tune in on Thursday to hear more about that. In the meantime, thanks as always for watching or listening to Cinemental and our coverage of Star Wars. If you like this episode, please subscribe anywhere you get your podcasts. You can also watch clips of Cinemental on YouTube, where we'd love to hear what you would like us to cover next. You can also watch my companion series, The One Thing, where I take a deeper dive into screenwriting, both available on the Large and in Charge channel on YouTube. Follow Dr. Josh Jones, America's Psychiatrist, on Blue Sky. This has been a Large and in Charge production. For Josh Jones, I am Jeff Jones, and we will see you on Thursday.